How are you, Manuel?
Well, Jesus, you?
Well, Manuel, today we are going to talk about a very controversial philosopher, Nietzsche, whose philosophy came to influence great figures in the history of the 20th century. What do you have to tell us about him?
Well, Friedrich Nietzsche is undoubtedly of the great thinkers of the 19th century, since he passed away in 1900, yet his influence extends significantly from the early to the mid-20th century, and today remains a fundamental writer. Many thinkers. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. He is controversial, as you said at the beginning, but he is a unique thinker. Like all this German school of great thinkers, he bases all his philosophy in an internal suffering of the human being, the very existence of the life that is a problem, because he barely has a life. We could say miserable again. He is another person that has a very, very difficult life already since he was a child. Has many problems, maybe because of his excessive intelligence. A person, all these people who have this degree of intelligence, because many times they have to crash against the reality with which they live. As Nietzsche says, to put Nietzsche in perspective, says man, in his pride, created God in his image and likeness. Notice, already it is to begin with mid-19th century, late 19th century, when a person tells you that man in his own pride creates God in his own image and likeness. Of course, this is a very strong concept, but when you go to analyze all of Nietzsche's thought, you realize that it makes a lot of sense. Why would God create man in his own image and likeness? When we, from the point of view, I don't know, people like us, ignorant, try to analyze God, how God can create us in his image and likeness. You can imagine a God with human characteristics, with human needs. That is, it makes no sense. People, others tell you that God is, I don't know, an energy, but to create God in our image and likeness, and to say that it is God who has created us in his image and likeness, is perhaps to appropriate God in a way. I don't know, a little bit like he says. We are influenced by our ego, feeling important, thinking we are something we're not. Like how God creates us in his image, which for him makes no sense. So, looking at Nietzsche's life, we can start exploring his complex philosophy. We'll try to summarize it here. We will go into the essential points of him and his most controversial points. Nietzsche was born in Rocken, in the state of Thuringia in Germany, 15th of October of the year 1844. Practically in the middle of the century, he dies in the year 1900. That is to say that he dies with only 40 years, and the last 10 years he lives practically in a state. Paraplegic soul. Is not that he had a very long life either, but a very profitable one, especially in the powerful philosophy that we are going to analyze. When you take a closer look at his numbers, 15, 10, 8, 844, it results in 24, which subsequently gives us the number 6. This is a significant number that can relate to a philosopher in this particular instance, because if it aligns well with that number, then as he progresses through his life, it takes the number 6 to its utmost extreme. Therefore, numerologically speaking, last week we discussed Viktor Frankl, who had the number 8. And we mentioned that it didn't match Nietzsche in any way if this number 6 is applied to him. Nietzsche starts with the difficult childhood, His father was a Protestant pastor, Lutheran. His grandfather was also a Protestant Lutheran pastor. So those influences were deep in the family, which, as we've discussed, is a strict morality, to which, of course, Nietzsche does not adapt. However, his father dies when he is only 5 years old. Then he has to move. The family moves to live with the paternal mother, Nietzsche, and his sister, the mother. The father's mother or grandmother and two unmarried sisters of the grandmother, all very devout. So he's surrounded by women, all deeply religious. And he shocks first. They take him to the normal school. He excels from the start in literature and music. Was Nietzsche a great musician? Played piano. Later, we will learn about his very close relationship, a passionate friendship with composer Richard Wagner. They are very close friends. Eventually, there is a break, but Wagner's music, as we all know, is triumphant music. The Valkyries, Tristana and Soldier, the Nibelungen, all that music. Therefore, to Nietzsche, he loves it. It fuels him. It nourishes his spirit. He studies, as I mentioned, he attends university and excels greatly there. And in an extraordinary case, he is at the university in Basel, Switzerland. At the age of 23, look, at 23 years old, he becomes a professor, which was challenging. Remember when we talked about Einstein who couldn't do it, and they made him an assistant professor, do you recall? At the university. He couldn't yet. Nietzsche, at 23, was recognized for his innate talent and was already a professor. But this man is so unusual, we could say, in his complex approaches. Few students attend his classes due to his controversy. It is, once again, he often writes about God's death, that God is dead and we are going to bury him because he is. Says that the Western Christian society has finished with God, that we ourselves have finished with God. So, how can we talk about God when God is a product that we ourselves have finished exterminating? Then, of course, in an approach controversial, it is very difficult for students to want to attend his classes. So I tell you, he is a professor because of his great knowledge. But he barely has students, and he only lasts as a professor for 11 years, until he is 34 years old. At 34 years, he is retired. He is retired because they no longer want to keep him there. They give him a small pension, and he is retired. So, he's a man who from the very beginning starts to say, well, you cannot love. And he refers mainly to Christianity, where you cannot love pass by. What does he mean by this? That loving is something very controversial and very difficult to execute. That in your private life, love. Well, yes, you can love, but if you cannot love, forget about it. In other words, and go to the Christian religion and say the Christian religion talks about loving, but you cannot love there, so pass by it. In other words, do not get into something that you know does not make sense, because you will end up entangled. He, in his interactions with others, both in academia and social, because people are dishonest. You are dishonest in your relationships. You are dishonest in your relationships. Things as you perceive them, being a university professor, you don't dare to tell the truth. Then he says a phrase, very famous, he says, "It's not that you lied to me. What terrifies me is I can't believe you anymore." That is, see how a lie is expressed. It's not the lie itself that hurts me, but that I can't believe what I believed anymore. He applies this to personal life and to religious or philosophical life. The fear of lying. What lying causes is losing the ability to trust someone who lied. And that's what terrifies him. Not the lie itself, but losing trust. Maybe Nietzsche's most famous phrase that everyone knows. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. A very famous phrase by Nietzsche. You often see it in movies, especially in war films and similar genres. For instance, Conan the Barbarian had it. I remember that. Conan the Barbarian had that saying, that which what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And to tell you all about his story is, in the end, a reflection on his own life. This is because he has a life, much like most of these people we discuss here, philosophers, a life that is very challenging, extremely controversial, a life filled with numerous adversaries, with many individuals who attempt to misrepresent his words. So he is still in college, writes his first book in 1872 at 28 years old, which is the book on music's origin. He keeps writing the Antichrist, the beautiful science beyond good and evil, and many consider his masterpiece, Thus Spake Zarathustra. Thus Spake Zarathustra. He makes use of Zarathustra or Zoroaster because in Spanish it is translated as Zoroaster. Whether referred to as Zarathustra or Zoroaster, he is the creator of what eventually became known as Zoroastrianism. He employs him as the central figure in this work, but essentially it is nothing more than a parody of the New Testament. Or at least he tries, not claiming Christ is Zoroaster, but he sees himself as Zoroaster. In this book, he speaks in the first person, because one of the intriguing aspects of Nietzsche is his use of the first person, which is uncommon in philosophy, as no prominent philosopher is known for writing in the first person, yet he writes as I, Zoroaster, crafting a series of parables and contradictions within what Christianity stands for. Returning to the time when he thus spoke Zarathustra, we all need to feel guilt. But deep down, no one needs to feel guilty. Guilt is a feeling brought by religion, Christianity, which we'll discuss more, is a religion of guilt. You're guilty of everything. Yet we don't need to feel guilty. He says love always has a bit of madness, often turns to love. It was once in love that fades. We discuss it. Love always has some madness. In madness, there's always some reason. It's like returning to Cervantes and Don Quixote. 3 centuries later. You know what I mean? I see it like that a bit. In love, there's always a touch of madness, but within madness, there's always a hint of reason. Just a little bit. To return to DQ, as I mentioned, he only ever fell in love once in his life, with the poet Lou Salome, and she did not love him back. She doesn't love him back. She was a poetess who, during that period, was quite popular. A woman, yes, who has become known to us, but really has not been. When you study literature or history, she is not a poetess that you typically encounter, but he fell deeply in love with her. And she concluded that he was very eccentric, a rather peculiar guy, and that they would not be able to have a relationship. He then discusses our beliefs about Christianity, about what is good and evil, and argues that every belief is just a prison. How can you hold a belief about God, about everything around us, and deep down we truly know nothing? Then those deeply held convictions gradually transform and become in our prison. And he say, I am not a man. I am a battlefield, always fighting. He doesn't see himself as a man. Later, the Superman idea will come, but he sees himself as a battlefield. His life is just a battlefield for his ideas. Nietzsche's books, when he was young, around 28 to 30, didn't sell much. Similar to all these authors we discuss who don't sell, who only sell upon their death or when they're already dying. Schopenhauer, who enjoys his glory, for just 8 years faced the same issue as the rest. They don't sell. Thus their ideas remain confined to a very small circle. And with the critics, who logically, as their name suggests, are called critics, because instead of praising, they focus on destroying anyone who introduces a new idea. But he assumes this because he believes these people can say whatever they want about him. But he doesn't care because they are not capable of expressing what he expresses and so forth. Envy, they criticize him. And that is the common case of many philosophers and of many characters that we have talked about here. The person in question has always fought not to be absorbed into the tribe. He tells you you frequently try to distance yourself from that. You might find yourself feeling alone and sometimes even scared. However, no price is too high to sacrifice your freedom. What he is conveying is that we exist within a tribe. It is the society, the Christian society, that holds us together, acting as a tribe. If you attempt to express some individuality and step away from the teachings of that tribe, they will likely try to eliminate you. However, he tells you, it is definitely worth trying. It truly is worth the effort to try. Yes.
So, Manuel, allow me to put this into perspective for you. His philosophical approach can be seen as a challenge or questioning of religious beliefs, with a particular focus on critiquing the Christian aspect.
Yes, of course, I tell you, his upbringing, his father, Protestant pastor, grandfather, Protestant pastor. It is again that strong religious influence that marks a child. So what he wants is that the children or society can get out of all those convictions that have been made nothing more than for cake. At the beginning, when he starts his books, when he is younger, his books are based on what he's trying to criticize, what is the Western culture. He mentions that Western culture, especially as Western culture, keep in mind, during that era and earlier, was predominantly a Christian culture. Any philosophy was rooted in Christianity. So he explains that. His view of this Christian culture has been always repressing life. And when he talks about life, he also refers to suppressing what he calls the Dionysian, meaning the sense of pleasure in life, as it encompasses many aspects, from sexual freedom to other types of freedom, like questioning one's own morality. He opposes the kind of morality that he sees as being a repressive form of morality, but this repressive morality has essentially made us into slaves. We have become slaves by accepting our own chains through our acceptance of that repressive morality. And in a certain sense, out of this you then see it, that same sense that said author's analysis. As Proudhon, Bakunin, or Kropotkin, those chains, Christianity and that Christian culture is nothing more than a chain that binds you in life and that unties you to its death so that you go to paradise. That's the criticism he always makes. They bind us with the moral, making us mere slaves, and then free us to go to paradise. But he questions everything about paradise. What proof do we have? He tells you these people now, because he is very much influenced. First, his great influence is Schopenhauer, who died a few years before, but is his great example, Schopenhauer. Then has a great influence on him, the whole theory of Darwinism about human evolution. Then but you, if he does, thousands of years ago, you were apes. You were helping us, some monkeys. Now you're giving lessons, some monkeys that came down from the tree. So, in a Christian society, we return to the topic. Regarding creationism or evolution was just beginning, considering that Darwin had only recently. It appears to me that Darwin published his theory on the origin of species in the year 1869. In other words, everything is relatively new, but he feels influenced by the idea that, yes, indeed, we are essentially monkeys, evolved monkeys, if you will. Then, naturally, this notion of being evolved monkeys inevitably clashes with the ego-driven belief that God created us in his own image and likeness. How could God possibly create us as monkeys if he made us to be like him? Does that mean God is like we are, or are we misunderstanding something? He mentions, as I noted initially, it's just our ego making us believe we're significant, that we're part of God. But what proof exists of this? There's more evidence suggesting we were apes and until recently lived in trees, becoming bipedal and walking the plains. Yet the belief that God made us in his image. Well, it's truly our ego that leads us to believe that simply because we are pure sapiens, we are nothing other than that. However, we possess the unique ability to think and reason, setting us apart from other beings. This belief is deeply ingrained in us, as we often consider ourselves superior due to our cognitive skills and capacity for thought.
Manuel, during his era, was proposing these revolutionary ideas, questioning the established religion, and attempting to offer a completely different perspective. This indicates that he was a philosopher who was, in some respects, quite incendiary, as he was addressing the most sensitive aspects of the society and religious beliefs of his time. How was it possible for him to navigate through all of that and still manage to contribute to the 20th century with such an extraordinary concept as the idea of the Superman? How is it that he could have symbolized that kind of belief?
Well, his beliefs spread through his books and admirers. Being a highly criticized figure, care. When someone stirs controversy, they also gain admiration elsewhere because his ideas were revolutionary. It's always the same. And maybe the fact a society like Germany, in his deeply Protestant area, is that the idea of God wasn't questioned until the Enlightenment 100 years earlier. It's not about questioning God's existence. The criticism is, what is God? What's God like? He's God in our image and likeness, and that's why he always laughs. Naturally, it creates controversy, especially in Puritan, closed societies where they impose on people from birth, on children, the fear of God. The fear of God is a foundational element. In many Christian ideologies, it starts with Catholicism, the first. In 1517, when the split with Protestantism occurred with Luther, as we mentioned, John Calvin, these ideas, the fear of God. Well, but you, and why fear God if he made me in his image and is my father? Why fear my father? I can respect him, but fear. That is what sense still fear? Fear of what? Eternal punishment? And why is my father going to punish me? Is it because I think differently, or perhaps because I refuse to think only what I'm told to think? To him, questioning is always about one thing, that you must have the freedom to think for yourself, and no one should impose on you what to think. It really is quite simple. He mentions that making things complicated is easy, yet simplifying them remains a significant challenge. We find ourselves entangled in a world filled with religion, countless stories, and politicians. Things become very intricate, and once they are shared and completed, simplifying them becomes a daunting task. This is because we've already immersed ourselves in a tangled web of complexities. Everything that could have been straightforward has turned so intricate that it seems impossible to make it manageable again. That's always part of what he tells us. When he discusses family relationships, he says some mothers need unhappy children, so maternal kindness can be nurtured. Then we would be discussing the psychology that arrives years later with Freud. Some mothers enjoy complicating their children's lives to offer them love and help them escape the problem they've made themselves. That's his message to you. They want to handle everything. They need their children to be happy, so they return to them and offer support. In other words, when someone shares these ideas through books, talks, and philosophy, they become a complex character. He says nothing is more hypocritical than ending hypocrisy in our society. How can we eliminate hypocrisy if we're all hypocrites? Returning to evolution, the monkeys are too good for man to descend from them. There he already criticizes Darwin's theory that monkeys are too good for us to descend from them, that maybe there is some problem with the theory of evolution, because he has never seen a monkey as violent as us. Remember, we are talking about when he was born in 1844, that Germany is not a unified country. Germany consists of kingdoms, counties, principalities, forming modern Germany, but were once independent. This marks the start of Germany's reunification, achieved in 1870 by Otto Wismar He's the one who reunifies Germany, and Richard Wagner's role emerges. His music is imperial, celestial, the great kingdom. The German Empire, which was once divided, is now reunited and back together again. Carlos, that is everything that the Holy Roman Empire was a big part of. All these areas of Germany is together again. So Wagner creates this mystical music. I'm not sure, but I'm really impressed by Wagner's music, especially his operas. Now I can watch them since I view them in segments. A Wagner piece can run from 3.5 to 4 hours, including scene changes. Just imagine how long you spend at the opera. I have to say, to be completely honest with you, this is actually the very first opera performance that I ever attended in my entire life. I went when I was about 12 or 13 years old at the Teatro Real in Madrid. The opera was the Nibelungen, and it lasted approximately 4.5 to 5 hours. That was my initial impression of opera at that time. And truly, there is no God who can endure it. Of course, there are scene changes, and all those changes happening. You find yourself there, unsure of how to see it, and you wonder, what is it about this that people find so appealing? And he remembers that it was in this festival in Bayreuth, there in Germany, which he still attends every year. Hitler went every year, and it was where it was represented. It was the Wagnerian festival. All these works of Wagner are represented. As I tell you, Nietzsche and Wagner have a great relationship. And in the end, precisely break up during the Bayreuth festival because Nietzsche leaves without saying goodbye to Wagner, because he says his works have taken such a nationalistic sense that he does not like. But of course, what Wagner was trying through all these works was to unify the German people, because they had been separated for hundreds of years, and what Bismarck had achieved was to unite them and then give them an identity as a nation, because the identity as a nation did not exist in Germany. How curious, in 1870, after the Franco-Prussian War won by the Prussians, the reunification of Germany is made. Nietzsche fights. In that war, he's an assistant doctor, medical stretcher bearer, because he had done a year of military service. That was obligatory, but he had done it voluntarily. During this period, he contracts a couple of strong diseases. I had forgotten to say it since he was young, since he was a child. With 14 years old, he has enormous headaches. Nobody knows how to detect it. He gets syphilis. It is supposed that with 17, 18 years old, it is supposed that through a prostitute. But at that time, they still did not know how to diagnose it. So it produced madness attacks. If he couldn't be diagnosed, and he experienced episodes of madness, so people said, this guy is really crazy. He's really crazy. But it was a result of this condition. And then, as I mentioned to you, in the year 1870, while he's at the front, he contracts diphtheria as well. So he becomes a very ill man, receiving a very inadequate treatment typical of that era. And consequently, he never recovered. Instead, it drove him towards insanity. This is why part of his writings, as he tells you, the real world is much smaller than the imaginary world. And I think we all agree on this because we live in a real world. Yet simultaneously, we exist in an imaginary world, and that imaginary world is utterly incomprehensible to anyone but us. Our imaginary world can be limitless, even infinite. So when he tells people this, naturally they think, This guy is really crazy, right? When he discusses human relationships, hope is the worst evil, because it's man's torment. Enough against hope. Hope, what is it? Hope in what and how? What hope can you have if you're a poor champion? What is your hope? To die? To join God in paradise? Why will God accept you in paradise? What hope do you have? This hope only prolongs that pain and suffering, because he says man's greatness is to be a bridge, not a goal. What man can love is just a transit to the sunset. So we must be a bridge, not a goal, as we are merely a transit to the sunset. And there he comes, using a word from Wagner's work, the twilight of the gods. Man should be a bridge, not an end in itself, as we're heading toward twilight. So, when someone says this in that society, immediately, people think he's crazy. What's he on about? Besides, people don't understand you, says that one. He appears as a creature, as a child, and that's where your will to power starts. And Nietzsche's philosophy ends with the will to power, which later reaches Hitler. The will to power. Remember that in the year 36, when Henry Reichswell, the German film director, makes a documentary called The Will to Power about the great success of the German people. Right? It highlights the Berlin Olympic Games of that year. The focus is on the will to power. So Hitler incorporates many elements from Nietzsche, but many are completely misinterpreted, completely married in context. Why is this? As I mentioned, falls deeply in love with Lou Andrea Salome. However, Lou Salome does not reciprocate his feelings, leading him into a significant period of personal crisis at a rather young age. Just to give you a bit of context, he was born in the year 1844. By the year 1890, you are considering that he was born in 1844, which makes him 46 years old. And you think about it, 890, that's in his 40s. He's in Turin. And notices that is passing by a horse-drawn carriage and sees that is guiding the horses, begins to hit a horse hard. Then he throws himself to stroke the horse to save him, and he falls there fulminated. It seems that it is a cerebral hemorrhage. He was first taken to a hospital. From there, he was taken to a psychiatric center, and finally, for the last 9 years, it was his sister who took care of him. And she is the front woman for all his works. He still had unpublished works, and it is she who begins to manipulate them. And especially after the death of Nietzsche in 1900, she still has Nietzsche's house and his works. Begin to make a dent in what is the National Socialism that would end with the Nazism of the time. And they end up adapting it to their ideology, as you commented before, the Superman. But the Superman, he doesn't mean an Aryan Superman, blonde with blue eyes, but a free Superman, free from moral and religious ties. He feels raw remorse, because to him, like a dog biting a stone, is nonsense. What is remorse for? That doctrine. applied to Nazism, there you clearly see that the Nazis act without remorse, fully applying Nietzsche's phrase, though he didn't mean it that way. But as I tell you, if taken out of context, you can apply it however you want. Politics, he refers to politicians, is a field, a work area for mediocre minds. He thinks politicians are all mediocre, and if they weren't, they wouldn't be politicians. However, he believes there are two types of people in politics. Some are seen as voters, and the rest they view as potential slaves. This is how he defines politics and how politicians perceive you, some as voters, and others as slaves. Exactly what 20-some years later Adolf Hitler is going to do, as his voters who vote for the Nazi party, and the rest are going to be slaves then, applies Nietzsche's philosophy. But Nietzsche wasn't saying this should be done. He noted politicians do it. Be careful. He doesn't say a politician must do it. Unlike Machiavelli, who says the prince must. No. Nietzsche says politicians see you this way. And Hitler understood it well. It's a revision of this. Those who support me are my voters. The rest will be my subjects. That's the ideal conclusion, and it's how you can twist any thinker's ideas. The real victory lies in the fact that that's achieved upon reaching the beautiful, then triumphing over the enormous. Here, it's intriguing to explain this. When one is born, when one gains the beautiful, what is beautiful? The identity, the harmony, and defeats the enormous. What's the enormous? The mass. The rabble, as he called it, the mass, that uncivilized mass following anyone, telling any story promising a better life. That's what we must differentiate. One thing is the beautiful. Another is the Nazis. When you achieve beauty, you rise above the masses. It's a great victory. Then all this makes you realize you are labeling as rabble. More than 70% of the German people, it generates for him. All that because he says he who has a why to live can face all the house. He who finds meaning in life can face all the house because he'll know how to live. He'll know how to live. As I repeat, the closed ideas of Christianity about heaven. He says, you must learn to live, to know how to live. Once you know how to live, nothing else matters because you've achieved something. Consider the depth all your thoughts have. Don't. That man who is able to live again and find with seriousness what he judged as when he was a child. That is to say, we have to become children again, to find again that even in our maturity, that makes us feel as happy as when we were children and did not have so much knowledge. What he is telling you here is that everything we have learned over the years is of no use to us because we are already looking at it from a point of view that is judged by our own life. So it is not necessarily real. He claims men's destiny consists of joyful moments. I truly believe that each and every person experiences certain happy moments at some point in his life. But it's rare for someone to have happy times. It's rare. You'll have happy moments, a moment, another moment, and another, not constantly repeated throughout an era. So I can say that in that life period, you had happier moments than now. But the whole period wasn't happy. There are only happy moments in that time that you should wait to be tied to. He says, he adores to those who do not know how to live any other way than sinking in the sunset, for it is they who pass to the other side. Suppose you say, I've come this far, lie down waiting for sunset, not seeking new things. Those people are happy in the end, as they know they've reached their twilight and can reflect on it. He has a deep admiration for those types of individuals, and perhaps this stems from his personal condition, as I previously mentioned, not in a physical sense, but rather related to certain disorders due to severe headaches. During the winter months, he would travel to the south of France or the south of Italy. This was because he required a milder climate, as the harsh cold weather would worsen his headaches and his madness. So, of course, is that this man in syphilis and all this led him to a situation of immense pain. And that immense pain that he experienced made him write these works. Well, being independent is the privilege of a small minority. It's the privilege of the strong. Independence is a privilege for the strong minority. Why? Because the majority are just sheep. They are followers influenced by the church, the government, and the authorities. They can't think for themselves because they're overwhelmed with life's problems, leaving no time to reflect on their situation. So they turn to the church, and it offers them. Here you will experience suffering in this life, though it is just a temporary situation. Afterward, you will enter paradise. What happens to you isn't hugely important in the grand scheme with God creating us equal. You are. A small sacrifice God is asking of you, right? We enter one of his books, Beyond Good and Evil, where he again explores love, stating that all done for love transcends good and evil. I think this applies to most people. When someone loves their children or family, they may go beyond good and evil to protect them. And he claims it's normal. So it's not wrong, since love transcends good and evil. Naturally, all these things question then. Germany's unification was very recent, necessitating a strong church for consolidating the German church, as Nietzsche starts being seen as an issue. He is a man who, as I was mentioning earlier, his ideas are often not well understood by others. He has only a handful of students, and as I mentioned, he is now retired. His books initially sell very little, but they begin to gain some traction around the years 1885 and 86. They start to spread more widely, primarily due to his association with Wagner. who holds him in high regard and admires him greatly. He thinks, or that happens in life, you don't hate. Oh, you despise, you don't hate more than equals or superiors. What's he trying to say? We're discussing a period, 1870, 1880. Strong industrial revolution in Germany country, transforming many workers' movements, strikes, deaths. Then he comes to tell you that you don't actually hate those people, whom you despise, including the workers and peasants, because they were looked down upon by all who had initiated their new social revolution, their industrial revolution. And deep down, they did not truly hate them, but merely despised them. You can only hate someone who is in competition with you, meaning someone who is your equal or who stands above you. This feeling that we intend to describe is a belittlement of the working class, which isn't genuine or real. It's not contempt. It's not hate. It's contempt, not hate. How can I hate someone beneath me? I can't stoop so low. I mean, imagine being in a maid's position. You might look down on her, but you wouldn't hate her. That's what he's saying. You might despise her, but you could hate your sister, brother, husband, or neighbor, people on your level. But how could you look down on a maid? I mean, how could you hate a maid if you're already looking down on her? No, for hate, because you're spreading it to others, even to those serving you, or working there 14 hours daily. That's a false idea. That's belittling, not hating. You must differentiate the two. Remember last week we talked about Viktor Frankl, who said the blow given by the guards wasn't what hurt most, but the insult. That came with the blow. It's similar. He said, how can you hate someone you belittle? It makes no sense. Sometimes you pretend one thing, but feel another. Word March and the Rudy's letter are better than polite and silent words. That is, it's better. A word pesoe, a rude letter, as many letters were written. What that silence communicates is actually more considerate than remaining silent. It's better to tell that person what you think than to keep it inside. Today we might think differently. Better to stay silent than to say something hurtful. He believed the opposite, that silence could be more complicit in wrongdoing than speaking up or writing to express your views. This philosophy is very direct and doesn't fit in today's world either. Imagine back in the 19th century. Think about what evolution is.
Manuel, since you are mentioning, I do not know of all this type of philosophy and vision of life of that time, and profiling us at the end of the program today in the XI century, all that the human being has gone through, and what we have seen, that was the influence of that vision of the Superman in Hitler, in the Second World War, in the Holocaust. Today is, or are we prepared to read Nietzsche and understand his philosophy and how much his ideas and his contributions today have, well, now reason to be and a validity?
Well, Nietzsche is a author difficult to read. That is, as I say, you will find loose phrases that if I told you yours, but if you start reading, Thus spake Zarathustra, which I say is a critique of Christianity using. Sometimes it is not understood. In our present time, it is difficult to understand him. I do not know if there will be many people interested in understanding him or prefer a short program in which he tries to understand his philosophy. For him, the ultimate goal of culture is to achieve simplicity and natural, which he holds in the highest regard. Simplicity and naturalness are his supreme ideals. However, the way he writes is far from simple or natural. Despite this, he believes that his approach elevates him to a very high intellectual level. Naturally, most people do not reach the level of his profound thinking. The thing that has loved man the most has always caused him the greatest harm, have demanded from him the impossible like all lovers. Notice what he means there. He who is demanded the maximum is going to be done the maximum harm. All of us who demand the maximum will do ourselves the maximum harm because there is no need to demand the maximum. But we demand it of ourselves. And he puts you the parallel as two lovers who demand the maximum, and in the end, they end up hurting each other. He perceives our life in a certain way, meaning that the boundaries we set at times can be quite unnecessary. We might end up causing ourselves excessive harm, and he often circles back to the topic of religion. When religion demands the utmost from us, it could ultimately inflict the greatest harm upon us because it seeks to strip us of everything, including our creativity and independent thought. Returning to your question about whether these principles can be applied in today's world, I think Nietzsche's philosophy is here to stay and will remain. Among the most read, Friedrich Nietzsche is most read in Germany. Then it's Austria. And I read that Argentina is the third country where he's read the most. How curious. Argentina is third globally. I found that fact very curious. But many of Nietzsche's theories, as I tell you, when we go back to Nazism, all these ideas, you were telling me about the Superman, but he is looking for a different Superman, a Superman who is above all that, of the church culture, which is beyond mere civility, beyond being part of the rabble, beyond being riffraff. And this is what Hitler eventually implements. He desires a German who is a new kind of man, a Superman, or Übermensch, as they say in German, one who rises above all that. Hitler distorts these ideas and incorporates them further. It captivates. Wagner's music, as I mentioned, is an ultranationalist music because it focuses on the reunification of Germany in the year 1870. They appointed Emperor Wilhelm, and the Second Reich commenced, that is known as the Second Reich. And then Hitler came and established the Third Reich. So indeed, there is a significant influence, but as I tell you, it is an influence, which was not Nietzsche's intention. Many of his ideas were misunderstood or altered. When ideas are taken out of context, it becomes possible to manipulate them in any way you choose. For instance, if you wish, you can misinterpret the Bible by focusing on a single phrase, or as we discussed here before, the Quran can also be misrepresented. Essentially, any text or idea can be twisted, that Hitler used. Nietzsche's ideas for his Superman, his race, yes, but Nietzsche meant a new race, a Superman beyond society's limits. And religious ties. Remember, Nazism was not religious, quite the opposite. Nazism was founded on the figures of the Valkyries, all to illustrate the power of man, the will to power, which represents the final segment of Nietzsche's work. It is primarily focused on the will to power. And this is the section that Nazism seizes with the assistance of his sister, as I understand it, because she perceives the will to power, which is the concluding segment of Nietzsche's work. It's mainly about the will to power. And this is the section that Nazism seizes. With his sister's help, as I understand. She perceives that it resonates every time. How did she achieve this? She would release a new edition of each work. The prologue was given to an author favorable to the Nazis, and then when he wrote you the prologue, this gentleman said to you, because when Nietzsche here has said this, because he means that in the Reich what Hitler wants is right. When he explains, it's not just lying to speak against what you know, but also to speak against what you don't know. What you're saying is, we live among ignorant people. What do they think? I mean, you see people sharing opinions on everything, thinking they know it all. Lies. Because they're not only sharing an opinion on what they know, but also on what they don't. If you're unaware of something, why offer an opinion? He often mentions this, especially about politicians and those around us. He discusses your knowledge and your day. He mentions your day. When you understand how to fill it with purpose, it's like wearing a suit with 100 pockets, a place for everything. Yet, life leads us into situations where we feel completely worn out. And he mentions that industrious races, as seen later with Hitler, find it quite a nuisance. In society's idleness, that's part of his Superman. Believing races must be hardworking, and he dislikes idle people. However, it doesn't mean people are lazy, just that he likes being busy and sees those who don't work as idle. Doesn't judge it as right or wrong, just says irrationality isn't an argument against existence, but a condition of it. The fact that something is irrational doesn't argue against its existence, but is a condition of it. Here comes Nazism to you. We might see Nazism as irrational, but this irrationality isn't a counter-argument. Rather, it's a fundamental part of what they propose. You understand what I'm saying, right? When you misrepresent things like this, all of this, it allows you to justify anything based on how you choose to interpret it. Our destiny exerts its influence over us, even when we haven't yet understood its nature. Our future is what dictates the laws of our present reality. This is somewhat similar to the discussion we had last week about Viktor Frankl's ideas. Leave your life behind and start as if it were a new life. Well, this could be said to have the same meaning. Our destiny exerts an influence on us even when we have not yet learned its nature. Our future dictates the laws of our actuality. And it is true. Indeed, it is true that we here are actively working out and shaping our own future, yet we often do not fully realize or comprehend the extent of it. He says that love and hate are not blind, but are blinded by the fire within them. Notice what a great phrase. Love and hate are not blind, but are blinded by the fire within them. You get me? Like, we often say love is blind, but he disagrees, saying it's the fire inside that blinds him, though that fire eventually fades. Then, over time, it causes the passion to gradually fade away and diminish. And he says that, talking about the Superman, he says that we like a good thing better when we are up to it, which means that most of the time we do not appreciate good things because we are not up to them. Notice what concepts are good thing we like best when we are up to it. but it is that most of the time we are not up to it. Then that is why we cannot appreciate a good thing. And going back to religion and going back to God, everything that is absolute is part of pathology. It's a disease to believe in absolute. How can we? What's an absolute? So, naturally, you're discussing ideas that today, well, yes, you could say anything absolute is part of the pathology. Yet we observe the absolutism in political parties, the absolutism in churches, everyone sees the absolute truth. If some people don't believe in that truth, then it can't be absolute. It's the approach of absolutely everything. Nothing can be absolute. That's a pathological disease.
More than just absolutism, it would actually be more like totalitarianism. That would resemble the imposition and the ownership of the truth itself, to feel as though one is the sole possessor of a singular truth, and the one who determines what constitutes that truth and what does not is essentially the person who governs it.
Exactly. Well, it is that all this evolves towards that believing in the absolute leads you to totalitarianism and populism, to all those who think like you. In the end, it becomes that RA, masses looking for their leader or their president. Here we are in the United States, the whole era we have lived through with Donald Trump, the value of the absolute truths. And if you do not believe what I believe, you are against me. But that, he says, that's a sign of pathology, that you have to be there. Absolute. There is no absolute anything. Nobody can define absolute, because absolute is everything. And how are you going to put almost 8 billion sapiens agree on something? What I mean is, there cannot be an absolute, you see. There's simply no absolute of anything. There cannot be an absolute when it comes to God, even though they have been teaching us this for, well, I can't even say how many years, maybe 2,000 years, if I remember correctly. But even the very first inhabitants of the earth believed in something. It's because it's always been unnecessary for humans to have faith in something, as he mentions. But, the concept of the absolute is just not there. It's pathology, meaning absolute, which we can grasp as absolute.
Well, Manuel, you have this remarkable reflection, a significant contribution, a very deep, elaborated, and complex program. As perhaps the most crucial aspect of Nietzsche is the questioning, and that's the part that still resonates today for the minds that dare to question themselves, society, and all beliefs. Anything else you'd like to add, Manuel?
I don't think so. Haven't we said it all? I don't know, but maybe when he mentions parents, they must have done a lot to make up for having children. Like he meant to say that having children isn't worthwhile because this shouldn't continue. It's better to gradually end it, following Schopenhauer's philosophy to cease having children so everything will conclude and people will no longer suffer.
A bit suicidal for society and humanity, but it's like him.
He saw it and the world, so why have kids? Does not make much sense. So this is one of his reflections. As I mentioned, he has, throughout his book, numerous reflections of this nature. He says all idealism eventually is just deception. It's similar. He sees we live in a deceived, submissive society, and a Superman must be born to change it. Hitler then takes him literally, creates his Superman to, we
He takes his Superman and look how it ended.
The thing, that's how it ended.
Well, Manuel, I really want to thank you so much. And well, I think it's important to invite everyone to check out your books. You can find everything on social media, all your publications, and don't forget to give us a like, share them, and visit our channel, Manuel Martínez on YouTube, and also Jesus Becerra on mine. We are both there, Manuel, and we will be seeing each other next time. Take care until then.
Thanks, Jesus. See you later.